All right, guys, welcome back with us, and we are talking with Joseph Riggio, Dr. Joseph Riggio. Welcome to today's call.
Thanks much. Appreciate it.
So we're going to talk with Joseph Riggio about sales influence and how just you can use influence and persuasion and the different elements of negotiating and communicating with people in a more influential, more beneficial way for the prospects of building your business. So that being said, we're gonna start off a little unconventional. We're gonna have Joseph tell a story because he's one of the master storytellers, and after he does, we're gonna let him introduce himself briefly, and we're gonna get right into the questions.
Well, the story that you asked me to possibly share with your audience, and it's one of the stories I actually like best, so I'm happy to tell it, is comes from the old country. My family's all from Italy, and actually my father's family is from Sicily. And in Sicily, they have a very traditional way. When you get married and you get taken away from the wedding in what they call the ciuccia chart. The ciuccia cart is, ciuccia means donkey, and the donkey is the horse, if you will, that takes this cart away. And donkeys are not like horses. They're a bit more stubborn, So this old man winds up marrying this beautiful young girl. And he's a relatively successful guy. He's got his own farm. And after the wedding is over, everybody's had a party. They've had a few drinks. They had a nice meal. Everybody's happy for the old man. He found his young bride. And she's happy too. He's going to provide a good life for her. And so they take off. And the donkey begins to go. And they get, about a half a mile towards where the house is that this man lives in that he's taking his new bride to. And the donkey, being a donkey, he stops. And he looks down on the ground. He sees a bit of fresh grass, and he starts to eat it. The old man gets out. He goes back into the cart, and he gets this big piece of, like a 2x4, a piece of wood, And he walks around. The girl, this young, bride, she doesn't know what's going on. And this is all about influence, of course. He's got to get the donkey to move, take his bride home, right? So he walks in front of the donkey, and he looks at the donkey, and he goes, uno, one. And with that, he hits the donkey as hard as he can in the middle of its forehead with this big log. The donkey's startled, of course, and he gets back in the cart, and the donkey takes off again. It goes about another quarter of a mile, and again, the donkey is doing what donkeys do. It stops. It wants to eat some of the fresh grass, so it bends down and eats the grass. The old man, he does the same thing. At this point, the bride's getting an idea of what's going to happen. She's familiar with it. He gets his log, his piece of wood. He walks around to the front. He looks at the donkey. He says, due, two. And he hits the donkey in the head again. Again, he gets back in the cart. The donkey is now startled, ready to go, and the donkey walks. This happens again, this time about half as far. And this time the man's really a little annoyed. He gets out. This time he pulls out a gun, a little pistol he's got in the back of his pants, a pistolero, And he shoots the donkey literally between its eyes. The donkey falls dead. The bride is stunned. She doesn't know what to do. She's shocked. This man just killed the donkey. He unhitches the donkey, takes the harness off the donkey. He gets back in the cart. She doesn't have any idea what's going on. He looks at her. He says, go walk. Take us home. Get into the harness. She goes, what are you talking about? I'm not going to pull that thing. He goes, uno. This is the way that you set up a structure of how you get people to understand when you mean business, so to speak. But in the old country, Mark, this is not something I recommend for the listeners, if you will, to our audiocast today. But they should think about this if they ever have to visit Italy, especially Sicily. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and this is a great story from both levels. And with respect to that, I think we're going through is this massive shift. And before we get into this shift that we're experiencing, and this shift leading to disruption, you have business models changing. Right now in California and nationwide, we have massive retailers going out of business. And certainly the model and what we used to know and what we know today and what we know in the future is definitely shifting. So we're going to get into business models, and I think it's it's relevant in terms of perception, and you certainly talk a lot about perception, and just hitting the rewind button a little bit to give you guys a bit of background, Dr. Riggio actually is a master NLP teacher, trainer, and has written several books. The last two, which were absolutely phenomenal. I bought them and read them myself. He also has a program called the Mythos Self, which is probably the single greatest personal development program, and I've certainly bought as many as I can think of. I highly, and we highly endorse it and recommend it, and you definitely want to consider taking advantage of that, and in terms of applying it to you and what you want to do with your personal development, but also your business development. So getting into business development, what do you think, and you talk about this, the difference between people that perform and don't perform and the relationship to what they pay attention to?
Well, there's a number of things that happen, and for me, thanks for the kind words in the introduction. And it's relevant to kind of maybe pick up here and make a quick statement that, my background, my professional background, my academic background is in the area of cognitive science, and specifically how people make decisions. And the particular slant that I come at things to is this idea of what we call state, the attitude that a person has when they enter into a way of thinking about whatever's going on in the world. And I say, with regard to this idea of perception, that people do not act on what's out in the world. They act on what they perceive to be out in the world. So the way that they're organized, their attitude, their state, what's happening internally for them, determines what they perceive, not what's there, right? So you had said, it was okay if I share some stories with your audience, right? So let me share another quick story, if I may, to give an idea of what I'm talking about here. When I was married to my first wife, I was an architect. And we're talking way back now. We're talking 30-plus years. I was a young architect. I was in my early 20s, and I was running an office. I was a partner in a firm, and I would come home about every night at the same time, 6 to 7 p.m. My wife was also working back then. This is before our son was born. And she would get home earlier than me, and she would prepare dinner. So by the time I got home, I knew I'd walk in the house, and within a short time, 15 minutes, a half an hour, we'd sit down at the table and have dinner together. Now, I would park my car on the side of the house. There was a driveway that was alongside the house, and I would walk around to the front door and walk in the house. And regardless of what night it was, she would say the same thing. She would say, honey, and I would hear how she said this word. So some nights she would go, honey, and I knew it was just a normal night. We'd get together, we'd have dinner, we'd chat a little bit about what went on during the day, and we'd have some kind of evening together. There was other evenings where she would, say the same word, but what I would hear was, honey, and I knew that was a good night to remember what I'd forgotten to do in the garage before I went in to have dinner. Right? So that was a signal, you could say, in the perceptual arena. And then there were other nights where I would walk in, I'd walk to the front door. I remember we're a young newlywed couple, and my wife would say, honey, and I would know no dinner that night. We were going somewhere else, not to the kitchen, right? And it was all about this one little phrase and the tone of voice that accompanied it. Now, if you can't pick up what's happening perceptually, and the way that the other person's state is that you're experiencing and having the interaction with, and the way that you are as a result of that, you'll get all kinds of different results. You'll get all kinds of different outcomes, right? So if I couldn't hear those distinctions, the night when I walked in and she went, honey, and I thought everything was just going to be dandy, okay. In fact, if I thought that was a night where she had said, honey, I was going to get a very different outcome than one I expected. And my state would be all wrong for what was going to happen. So this becomes the fundamental grounding, if you will, of how a person needs to begin to think about when they're engaging in a new business, how important you could say it is that they organize internally how they're perceiving what goes on in the world around them, and that they can control. We live in a chaotic, uncertain world. The world is changing rapidly. We all know that. We all hear it. We read about it in the business magazines, the business books. We see it on television. And we can't control what's happening in the world. That's bigger than we are. But we can control our own experience and how we react to what's happening in the world. And if we can do that, that gives you a tremendous edge in taking your business forward in a way that others might miss, and therefore makes you far more competitive in the same space, regardless of what that space is.
So that's a great topic, and I really appreciate this idea that you can actually take control of the things that are, not just external, but obviously internal. And we talk about state. Can you briefly talk about state and state control, and this idea and concept that things aren't always going to go according to plan? A great example is just in our pre-run of getting set up. We had multiple technical difficulties getting this call going. But can you talk about for a business owner, and certainly at creditpathway.com we specialize in dealing with new business owners, startups, entrepreneurs, and I know you in your work of josephriggio.com, you specialize in working with entrepreneurs as well. Can you talk about this idea of managing your own internal state in relationship to the external environment?
Sure, because that's, as you say, very fundamental, very key to the work that I do, as well as I think really key to this whole space of entrepreneurship, right? So, entrepreneurs, and I'm going to call them young entrepreneurs, and I don't mean chronologically by their age. What I mean is more where they are in their business development. So they may be 70 years old, but it's the first time they've gotten into their own business, and they're a startup in that sense. They're a young entrepreneur by my language, if you will. And young entrepreneurs come into their businesses with a certain degree of trepidation, fear, because there's a certain risk in taking this chance and taking the leap into a new business. There's financial risk, there's the risk of being exposed and people now seeing you for your successes and your failures. And the standard way that we're taught is to look for potential problems, is to avoid risk, right? And to identify what the problem is that we're trying to solve all the time and come up with a solution. And already, by, again, the language that I use, Mark, we're talking about a state experience here where they're looking for problems. They're looking for what's wrong. And their whole mental organization, you could say, is already so short-sighted because they anticipate what can go wrong, and therefore they're noticing for that, not for what can go right. So the first thing that we do is we switch that, we twist it. We will teach the people that we work with through coaching or consulting, whatever the process is that we're engaging with them, to begin to notice for what's working. Like the fact that they had an idea and they acted on it, that alone creates a tremendous leverage compared to the hundreds of thousands or millions of people in the world who dream about getting started but were unable to take that first step. And if we can just get them focused on the idea that they've done that they've acted on their idea, that they're a person of action, they can begin to see themselves in that way. And it reorganizes that internal state experience. And we can then from there begin to say, well, if even little things are working, tiny little bits of what's going on around them are working, how can we build on what's working? How can we work from strength versus from weakness? So to use the example that most people, I think, who are listening to us will be familiar with, there's an old saw, an expression that's used, an aphorism, that says, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And of course that's true if you're talking about mechanical systems. But in human systems, which are dynamic, now we're talking about something completely different. And in a human system, a chain is always as strong as its strongest link. You see, that super player, that expert, will raise the whole system to a higher level. And everybody around them will play at that higher level. You know, when Michael Jordan joins a team, or we get a superstar of that caliber joining an athletic team, a professional sports team, they don't lower the performance of that team. The team doesn't play to the caliber of the lowest player. That team begins to move up to play at the caliber of that superstar that's been brought onto the team, because something happens that coalesces them at that attitudinal level. They begin to expect to win. They begin to expect to have a chance where they hadn't had a chance before, right? And if you don't mind, I'm going to take just another minute or two to emphasize this point, because I think it's so dang important, right? if you think about a guy who was one of my youthful heroes, Vince Lombardi. Vince Lombardi was a football coach, and he took on the assignment of being head coach on teams from high school to college to professional. And every team he joined had a losing record the year that he joined the team. He came into teams that, in baseball terminology, were all under 500. Less than half the games they played, they won. And yet, every year, from the minute he took the team over, with the same team players, with the same people in the same positions for all intent and purpose, he always came out with a winning season. Not necessarily a championship season, but he went from below 50% wins to above 50% wins with the same team. Now, there's something going on there which has more than just the quality of the player or the talent that's inherent. It's got to do with an attitude he brought onto the field with him and imbued those players with. He brought into them a sense of potential or possibility that somehow had been missing before. And that alone took that team to the next level. That's what leaders have to do. That's what entrepreneurs have to do. That's what business owners need to do for the teams that they manage as well, even if they're a team of one, just themselves, right? If they don't do that well, they miss an opportunity to succeed where others would fail.
It's great. So, guys, if you're just tuning in, this is creditpathway.com. We're speaking with Joseph Riggio, and
I can't unmute you. Unmute yourself.
See, this is one of those moments again, Mark, where you have to deal with the uncertainties and chaoses of life. Because it looks good from here and your sound is good from this side, but I think you think you're not coming through. But you are.
So perceptions.
There you go. There you go.
Can you and the systems and the breakdowns in the systems read my next question. So can you talk about perceptions and just so you guys know, a lot of what Joseph does is he's taken this rigid, very academic NLP that you've probably heard of, created by Richard Bandler, and he's put it into a model, his own model, where it's actually applicable in your own personal development and as well with respect to your business. So can you talk about perceptions in this concept that you talk about a lot of what you think isn't exactly not necessarily what you think it is?
Yeah, I mean, the fundamental premise that exists in the world that I play in, this world of cognitive science, is that despite our best intentions, we never actually come in contact with the world as it is. We come in contact with the world through the filters we hold. You know, you and I go into a bar, Mark, and we decide we're going to have a whiskey together. And in that bar, let's just for kicks say we're in some nice place and there's 20 beautiful women. And you and I are looking around and we're going to now vote on who the most beautiful woman in that bar is. Do you think that we're necessarily going to come with the same selection? Do you think that your preferences for hair color, eye color, height, skin, figure, attitude, clothing, all of the things that go into the perception we have of what makes a woman, or it may be a man, beautiful or handsome or attractive, is the same from person to person to person to person? And of course, it's rhetorical. It's not going to be, right? So we may sit there and end up having our whiskey together and agreeing to disagree and recognizing it's not about what's out there. It's not about the women or the men that we're looking at. It's about how we see them in our mind's eye through the perception that we have from them being out there in the world. So it's both things. It's not one or the other. I'm not saying that there's nobody out there, that we're living in fantasies. But we shape what we see because we hold an idea in our mind of what we want to be true and what we think is true, what we can call a set of expectations. And this is really significant for, again, the entrepreneurs who are listening to us. You act on your expectations, not your desire. Like, there's no entrepreneur ever ever that started a business that doesn't want to succeed and succeed wildly. There's no entrepreneur in the world who doesn't want to be profitable and successful financially. I mean, the insanity of thinking that somebody starts a business to fail is beyond my imagination, frankly, because I've met thousands of entrepreneurs, and I haven't met that person yet. But what happens is, despite the desire to become profitable, despite the desire to succeed, and even succeed wildly, they may hold an expectation that's in conflict. They're afraid, or they're unsure, and that fear or that uncertainty enters into their psyche and builds an expectation that things are going to be difficult, let's say. Things are going to be challenging. Things are going to be impossible for them to succeed at with the resources they currently have. And they may even enter into this really devastating mindset, which is, if I had this or that, then I could do this or that. So if, then, right? If this, then that. And this is a very dangerous mindset. If a person waits until the circumstances and situation in the world beyond themselves is perfect for them to take action, they're going to sit at home on the couch and watch reruns of Married with Children. That's what they're going to do. Because that fear, that uncertainty will stop them. Because the expectation is what drives behavior, not the desire. And we have to build in ourselves a different awareness of what we're expecting. And when we find ourselves confronting an expectation of failure, or an expectation of high levels of challenge, or an expectation of resistance, whatever it may be that seems to be an obstacle that we're confronting, the first thing we have to do is accept it. This is what's actually going on. I'm really concerned. I'm really worried about this. And then we have to take it apart. We have to go into the other part of our brain, which is the logical, conscious part of the brain, which can look at things very logically, very objectively, and say what's really happening. And then based upon what's really happening, what can I do about it? And all I need to know, Mark, the only thing I need to know at this point is the first step to take. I don't need to know what I'm going to do 6 months from now, or a year from now, or 10 years from now. I just need to know, what am I going to do either right now or the first thing tomorrow morning? And then based upon what happens when I take that action, and that's the critical factor, is transitioning from the desire to act to the actual action itself, I'll have gotten feedback that will tell me what I need to do next after that. And step by step, even small incremental steps, one little thing at a time, I build my business and I create success.
Okay, that's awesome, and it reminds me, when in looking back at the previous comment that set up this question, Richard Bandler, he talks about propulsion systems, and and this is something I've talked to with a lot of our business clients when getting them funded and getting them through the process of getting startup funding, which is foreign to a lot of people, that you can even get funded as a newfound business without all your financials and without a business plan. But yeah, we do it all the time. And it's this idea of rehearsing success. And this, Richard Bandler called it a propulsion system, as you well know. And this idea that as you move forward and as you rehearse success and as you make progress, it's this idea of, what do you do next? What step do I need to take next? And the fact that you take that action, and it's action that is actionable, that remains within your control, you will eventually get to where you're going by forward progress. So that's interesting. I've listened to hours of your interviews and talks, and that's one thing I really never remember hearing you talk about, but it's something that we talk about a lot with our clients. Do you think that's, in terms of other best practices that business owners can take, what are some other ones relevant to this concept of propulsion systems that you just mentioned?
Well, I mean, if I go back to Richard's work, and I know Richard's work, and I think, I'm a big fan. I think Richard's actually a genius in the field of NLP that he created, and in the field of transformational change. He's really one of the masters. And what he's really talking about there is the idea of building what I call a future memory, right? He calls it future pacing, where you're trying to project out into the future what it is that you want to happen and take a point of view of actually what's it like to think about having the success, right? What I found is, Mark, that when we're working with people, what's more important than thinking about the success is thinking about what happens after you have the success, what I call the outcome of the outcome. And see, we want to do things because we want to have the outcome, right? Whatever that may be. I want to get a date with some girl that I'm interested in. I want to start my business and I want to generate a certain level of revenue. I want to get a new client and I have that particular client in mind, whatever it may be. But seldom do we remember to ask the question, why do I want that? What will happen when that happens? And my advice to, again, all of the people who are starting out especially, and this applies actually equally even to mature businesses, is stop being clever. Stop being sophisticated. I really can't emphasize enough how important it is to think about the one thing that will create the most leverage at this moment in time. Now, that one thing is a function of the intersection where the points meet together of the resources you have available, what you can do, what's available to you in this moment, financially, in terms of expertise, knowledge, skills, insight, personnel, equipment, whatever it may be, all the resources that you have collectively, and the opportunity to apply those resources that you have right now. Where's the greatest leverage that's available to you in the moment? So I don't want to go after a market. I don't know how to go after a market. I know how to go after a client. Now, I may define the market to help me focus in and create a funnel to look at where is that client I need to identify, and then I may wind up having a cluster of 10, 20, even 100 different potential clients. And I need to think about, even if I'm doing this virtually, by the way, if I'm doing a purely internet-driven business, I'm going to build an avatar of that ideal client and build my business as though I'm trying to get that one person to be attracted to my offer, that one person to buy into what it is I'm presenting and to become connected to me. If I'm in a business where I'm actually soliciting clients who are real and I'm going to reach out to them, or I'm going to try to get them to, in an inbound way, contact me, I'm going to focus on that one client, that company, that CEO, that CTO, whoever it is that I can identify and really, in my mind, create a rapport with and begin to think, what do they need to hear from me? What do they want to see from me? What has to happen for them to say, I want to do business with Joseph Riggio. I want to make a connection with this guy and have that thing he talks about happen for me. And if people can narrow down to the very specific point of the singular area, the singular thing they can do that has the greatest leverage, that creates propulsion and creates that forward-looking view into this idea of what Richard calls the future, pacing, and I call future memory, and lets you begin to realize, if I can get this person to say yes, what it does for me is all these other things, and that allows me to grow my business incrementally, and eventually, after a few successes like that, it allows me to grow my business exponentially, which is what we're all looking for. We're looking for that moment of transition where scalability happens. And now we're not fighting for the next sale. We're actually dealing with the influx of business we've created because we've set a position in place, and we've become known for that position, and we've become attractive as a result.
Yeah, it's awesome. So in terms of marketing, in terms of specific marketing strategies, I know we were kind of touched on that just before in terms of, taking a brand new business in the face of a shifting, transforming marketplace where there's massive amounts of uncertainty. What are some specific marketing mindsets that an entrepreneur and a new startup business can have in addition to what you just said and building upon and expanding upon that going forward?
Okay, now I'm going to get heretical on you. I'm going to be a blasphemer if you don't mind. And that is, the first thing I would recommend everybody does who wants to become successful at marketing is go into their business library and collect all of the marketing books they have and ideally burn them. But if they're not going to burn them, throw them away, give them away. And if you can't bring that yourself to do that, get yourself one of those banker boxes from Staples and put all of the books in that box and bring it to the basement and get them out of your sight and out of your mind. Because if you're just starting up, none of that matters to you. What matters is taking action every day to make something happen. So, again, I'm going to go back to my last point, Mark, and say, what can you do? Who is it that you want to make contact with? And how can you identify those people and begin to take action on that point, right? I would refer people back to the movie Wall Street with Michael Douglas and who played that? Sheen. What's his name?
Charlie Sheen.
What is it?
Yeah, you got Charlie Sheen.
Charlie Sheen. Thank you. Charlie Sheen. Couldn't think of his name. So, Charlie Sheen, he knows if he can get this whale to do business with him, everything else changes. And he puts all of his energy, all of his effort, all of his psychic direction into figuring out what has to happen. And there's that scene where he sends the guy or brings the guy, I can't remember exactly, it's been a long time since I saw the movie, obviously, a box of cigars, which he found out are this guy's favorite box of cigars. And he begins to make inroads. Now, very few people are willing to take the time to make the sacrifice to devote themselves with that kind of clarity, that kind of intensity to getting something to happen, which is really a leverage point for their business. That one client who will introduce you to hundreds of other clients. You want to have somebody who's influential, who's a market maker, if you will, for businesses like the one you're in, right? You want that one interview by that major news source who's going to make you known to all the other people that you need to be in touch with. Whatever it is that you have to do, you have to identify, again, a very small number, 3, maybe 5 actions that you can be taking and putting your attention on for the next 3 to 6 months, and that's all you're going to do. You're going to go after that client. You're going to get news. You're going to be in social media if that's important to you. You're going to meet people and network. Whatever it is you're going to do that's going to generate that momentum in your business, that's what you need to do. You don't need a marketing strategy. You don't need sophisticated planning. You don't need to buy software to manage all of the appointments. You don't need any of that until you have a business. The most important thing is take action today. Now, I'm going to step out of frame for a moment and talk in a space where I'm actually minimally knowledgeable. But because of the work I do with entrepreneurial clients, I've been doing a lot of coaching for many years, and I've consulted with people literally for almost 30 years at this point who are in the position of this startup role. And one of the things that makes a difference is if they have enough funding, whether it's a bank account that they built or family money, or they borrow money, or they get a line of credit, or they have a client who's doing business with them and generating cash flow, whatever it is, that ability to remove the fear that I have to make it happen today gives them the ability to look a week out, a month out, or 6 months out, which is what it may take to build that momentum before the things that you need to happen really begin to happen. That pressure of having to get that sale tomorrow morning can actually be destructive to a business. And despite, again, what some of the best marketing tomes suggest, if you read them, you need to be able to put your attention on what's really important and not what's most expedient.
Sure, sure. So in terms of, and we glossed on this earlier with the technical difficulties of managing expectations when things don't go right. How can someone take, as an entrepreneur, when we know their first 90 days is going to be glutted with things that don't go right, and of course, obviously, even past the initial 90-day, and you talked about 6 months and even beyond that, what steps can someone take to practically and actually take control of the days and moments when things definitely do not go right?
There's a number of things. I think probably one of the most important things is to recognize you're not in control, right? You, as I said earlier in our conversation, there's everything that's outside of you. The world beyond you is not in your control. And you have to go in knowing that. as opposed to looking for predictability as the foundation of your business. Look for creativity as the foundation of your business. Expect things to not happen the way you expect them to happen. Build an expectation of uncertainty, and build a flexibility, a resiliency to be able to respond in the moment to what comes up. See, I think probably if I had to give you the one trait that for me is the most critical trait, it's this trait of resiliency. You'd be able to encounter something that turns out very different, wildly different, completely different from what you expected or wanted to happen, and to be able to make the next move anyway, to be able to take action despite the seeming obstacle that you're bumping up against, right? That is really the most critical thing I can think of that you build into a personality. And great entrepreneurs naturally have this. In fact, they see what others perceive as obstacles like opportunities. They recognize that where things are difficult, that's where the greatest opportunities lie, because nobody wants to go there. Nobody wants to deal with what doesn't work. But great entrepreneurs look for what's not working so they can put their attention on that thing and figure out how to take an angle on it that lets something happen that others aren't getting to happen, right? And
Sure.
So that's part of it, is to really build an expectation of uncertainty. And that's why I say throw away the marketing books. Don't spend endless amounts of hours budgeting. Don't spend endless amounts of hours figuring out the perfect plan. Do not spend 6 months organizing your next 2 years of activity. The world's not going to be that. It's going to be something else, and neither you nor I know what that is.
Sure. And I think running along those lines is this idea of avoiding distortions. It's sort of the other side of the fence of feeling stuck, and it's almost like the distortion itself allows people to be stuck. And we just did an interview with creditpathway.com with Jim Eckley, an attorney on all different funding scams out there. And I saw the interview that you did with Rich Schefrin about turnkey marketing systems that just automatically and magically put money into your bank account, and it's kind of the same thing here. We have people in the business funding space that are selling these distortions, based upon people's perceptions that something actually exists. So I'll give you a good example. Shelf corporation funding, that you can just magically get $500,000 in funding because you buy an expensive aged corporation that's 3 years old, or the CPN funding that you can buy, which is actually fraud, and sad that people are buying into it because it's a felony. But you can buy one of these numbers, which is not your own, and avoid the fact that personal credit is the gateway to initially establishing business credit. But can you talk about distortion management? Because as a hallmark throughout your work is this idea of our perceptions being the gateway to our ultimate actions, and you have a really elegant model, 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it's worthwhile for people to hear you explain it best, as how initial perception leads to ultimate action.
Well, it's a great segue actually, because the model you refer to is what I call getting unstuck, and it's like our central flagship program, if you will. It's where I recommend most people start with us, actually, if we're going to work with them, because it is so fundamental. And you're right. The thing that I was going to say before you introduced the idea of the 4-step model of getting unstuck is really, how do you avoid distortion? What came to mind as you were saying that is you have to know 2 things. Why are you doing what you're doing personally? Why am I in the business I'm in? Why do I do the things with the clients that I do with clients? What's in it for me? Not just the payout, not just that they'll pay me to do it, but on a deeper, more personal level, why am I really doing this? You need and want to know that. And the second thing is, what do you expect that will create? What outcome are you aiming for? So if I walk into that model with that preamble, the first step is really defining an outcome that's worth going for. See, here's a big problem. is that there are many people, entrepreneurs included, who spend a lot of time and energy figuring an outcome out that they're going to go for that they don't really want, right? They may want the result of the outcome. They may want something that's related to the outcome. They may want the acclaim they're going to get if they succeed. They may want to please their wife or their boss or whoever it may be, but they don't really want the outcome for themselves, and they especially don't want to do what it's going to take to create the outcome. Because setting an outcome is one thing. Living with it through the process of making it happen, making it so, is a whole nother thing. And people will actually sabotage themselves right at that starting point when they are unwilling to face up to and admit, this is not something I want to do, or this is not something I'm willing to do. Right? So the very first step is having great clarity around why do you want the outcome you're setting out to achieve, and what will it get you? Do you want that thing enough to be willing to do what it's going to take? Now, let's assume that that's true. That's step one. You've defined an outcome that's personally meaningful for you, and you're committed to seeing through. Well, the next thing is, do you know what it takes to produce that outcome? Do you understand the structure of how to create that outcome? What's it going to take to produce it? What has to happen? What are the actions that need to be in place? What's the structure or the infrastructure that you need to be building on so that you can produce the outcome you claim you want? Do you know what it takes? And this is step two, knowing what it takes. The third step is, let's assume again, you've defined an outcome that you want, you're willing and able to commit to it, you know what it's going to take to produce it. Do you know how to do the things you need to do? So let's say that I decide I'm going to be a custom home builder, Mark, and I want to build the best houses in my area at a very high price point. And I'm really excited about that. I'm willing to do what it takes because I love the idea of the income it will produce for me. I like the business and the flexibility. I like working with people. I have an artistic sense of development and what I want those houses to look like visually and the contribution I'll make to the community, blah, 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 blah. I'm all in, right? I'm literally all in, and I'm personally invested. And I know what it takes. I know that a house requires certain considerations. I've got to site it on the property. I've got to build a foundation. I need electrical systems. I need HVAC. I need plumbing. I need structure. I need all those things. I know all the things that go into a house. And now the question that I'm confronting is, that doesn't necessarily mean I know how to do those things. It doesn't necessarily mean I know how to pour a foundation or lay concrete block for the foundation. It doesn't mean I know how to do electrical or plumbing work. It doesn't mean that I can put the frame up and do the carpentry work and put a roof on a house. So there's a difference between what to do and how to do it. But both of these things have to be present. Now the advantage, of course, is I don't have to necessarily know either what or how. So let's say I decide I really want to be a home builder. I can hire an architect. An architect, an engineer, well, they know what to do. They know what pieces go into a house. They even know how to put them on paper, so somebody else who knows how to do those things can follow the design, take the blueprints, and build the house that I've imagined, right? So while these are critical components, the what and the how, and we have to bring them together, I don't necessarily need to be the one who does it. I don't have to reinvent wheels that have already been designed. But I have to understand that those things must be in place. Now, the fourth, and for me the most critical component, is what I call unconscious or hidden limitations. This is where I get in my own way, right? So the classic example, if I stick with my example of being a home builder, is that I now have the home I want to build. I've gone to the architect. I've hired a general contractor. But I want to be in charge. I want to tell them how to do their job, even though I don't know how to do their job, even though I'm not nearly as skillful, but I have a sense that if I give in, I'll be losing my power. If I give in, I'll be seen as less than as important as I want to be, whatever it is. But I'm not really aware of this consciously. I just keep stumbling, and I don't know why I'm stumbling. Well, I have to get to the ability where I can recognize, and this is that distortion thing you were talking about, the perceptual thing. If I recognize that I'm committed, I'm fully invested and all in, I know what to do, or I've got somebody else who knows what to do, I know how to do it, or I have other people who know how to do it, and I keep going around the same circle and failing, then it's not those things. It's something else. 99 out of 100 times, that something else is me. I've gotten in my own way. And I've got to be able to face up to that. I've got to be willing to look it directly in the eye, get out a mirror, steer deeply into it, and say, how are you screwing up the outcome that you intend? And if I can't do that for myself, I've got to find somebody with great skills who can be the mirror for me and help. And this is also going back to that question you asked about how do you deal with uncertainty, is we must have people in our life who we can trust and count on, who are not as emotionally invested in our outcomes as we are, but who are deeply emotionally invested in us. And that's a rare thing to find, but when you do, hang on for all it's worth, man. Hang on.
So one corollary that I'm thinking about when we are talking about this idea and this concept of the four-step process and avoiding the distortions and clarifying is transcending that into a space of knowing, and you talk about this, I think, in your TED Talk, one of the TED Talks you did. You had mentioned knowing when it's okay to definitively say no and confidently say no based on knowing yourself. Can you expound upon that?
Well, this is that fourth step I just talked about this unconscious or hidden limitation, right? The unconscious blockage that we have. And it's when you come to the realization of who you really are, what you can do, what you can't do, you can confidently recognize that and say, like a very clean example was before I said, I know that my expertise is not finance. You know, I have a general sense of it at best, but I have no depth in the areas. So I said, I noticed from working with hundreds or thousands of entrepreneurs that having the right kind of funding up front, having that leverage to have the financial capital you need to act with confidence and with certainty as you go forward is important. But that doesn't mean I'm an expert in finance. So if somebody asks me a question like, Joseph, how do I do this or how do I do that when it comes to that area? Or a legal question where I have even less competence. Even if I have an idea, which is a pure, ungrounded opinion, speculation, I have to recognize I'm not in a position to offer authority there. Now, if I can do that, and that's a starting point, I can maybe begin to recognize that for myself as well. I can begin to recognize where I'm full of it, so to speak. I like to say that when we're dealing with other people, we have an innate, incredibly well-tuned bullshit meter. We know innately when somebody else is just laying it on. Even if we don't know what they're talking about, we know that they don't know what they're talking about, right? When we look at ourselves, we become so skilled at deceiving ourselves, we start to not notice we're deceiving ourselves. But if we can do that, if we can recognize our limits, and this is the important point here, we can know where and when to say no, right? So if I'm that home builder and I want to build those custom, high-end, beautiful homes, and somebody comes to me and says, can you build me 25 track houses? I have this piece of property I want to develop, and I want to build low-income housing. I've got to be able to recognize in that moment, without thinking about it, without even to contemplate it, without figuring out if we can start another business, without any of that garbage, no, that's not what we do. That's not who we are. And when I do that, that signal resonates so powerfully for that person, it's clear to them, but more importantly, it resonates for me. It reconfirms in me the certainty that I need to be able to act in the sphere of influence where I want to make an impact, where I want to do things in the world. And from a sales point of view, an influence point of view, I always believe that a salesperson should know when the answer is no before the person they're trying to sell does. They need to be able to say, you know what, it doesn't make sense for us to do this. Let me not waste your time or mine. If things change, let's revisit this and come back together, rather than constantly trying to force that sale, make it happen, when it's just so much more valuable to use your time and your energy with somebody who's actually interested.
Sure. Sure. So just to close that loop, I think a lot of that ties up this idea of propulsion systems, of rehearsing success, of what do I need to do next, of forward motion, and forward motion of avoiding the pitfalls, whether they're external or internal distortions. So moving along the lines of sales and influence, one of the new things I notice in your marketing is this idea of ethical sales, and this idea of that you get, and the topic of the title that we created was that you get what you negotiate. So can you talk more about this concept of ethical persuasion and you getting what you negotiate?
Well, two things here. First of all, that title, you get what you negotiate for, I took from a guy named Alex Carras, who's been doing this for many, many years. He's the father of ethical negotiation, not necessarily ethical influence, but he has been teaching this and working with thousands of people around the world doing the work. So that's really his phrase, and I want to make sure he gets credit for it where it's deserved. The second thing is that in response to your question, ethical persuasion or ethical influence, ethical selling is the simplest thing in the world. And what I mean by that is it's just based upon, am I getting the other person? Am I getting Mark, if I were talking to you, what Mark wants? Not that I'm not getting what I want. Not that I'm not going to make money on this sale. Not that I'm not going to be able to get the outcomes that I need as a businessman or as an individual. But am I delivering what you need as well in the interaction we're having? So to be very blunt about it and very exposed, if you will, I have no problem manipulating you in any which way I can to get you what you want, in a way that's fair, in a way that's justifiable, in a way that's balanced between us. I'll manipulate you all day long to get you what you want. Now, I also recognize that that's not going to work for either of us if I'm not getting what I want. Because if I get the yes from you, but it means I have to deliver in a way which is harmful to me, I'm going to then, whether I intend to or not, begin to look for ways to cut corners. I'm going to look for ways to build a little in for myself. I'm going to try to protect my position when I should have been doing that at the outset. So the ethical position is to ensure from the very get-go, as we begin our interaction together, that I'm making sure you get what you want and need, and that I get what I want and need to deliver it to you, right? So every time we hold that in balance, that happens that way, all of the other conversations and issues that people have, as far as I'm concerned, around manipulation and influence and persuasion and ethics, they just go away. They don't exist anymore, right? And I learned this most probably importantly in my own home as a child growing up with my family, and then it was reinforced when I had my own family. How do I interact with my wife? How do I interact with my children? Because I want things in the world. I want the world around me to be the way I want the world around me to be. I want a certain level of comfort, and I want a certain level of ease. I want the things that show up in my life to be the way I want them to be. And when you're in a family, as you may know, you live very closely to one another, often for very intense and long periods of time. And in order for me to have what I want, I really need to attend to the needs of others. I really need to attend to how I'm interacting with them so that they're also comfortable. They're also getting what they need and want. And now that meshing occurs, and everybody walks away feeling good about having had the interactions they're having, right? So ethics is the easiest thing in the world as far as I'm concerned. The problem is when we get back into that loop of self-deception. And my work, the core, the center of the work that I do and that we do as a company is just helping people to get clarity around this idea of perception, seeing things as they are and recognizing the effect it has on us as a person, what's happening inside me, what's happening in you, attending to the signals that are in the system, as I like to talk about them, and really opening up this domain of perception, which is the skillfulness to stay present in the world and act decisively when opportunity presents itself.
So I think right now I'd like to go back and revisit the topic that I started on about personal development. And you had created the Mythos Self program, which I personally own and I've used and it's helped me immeasurably. I've turned on lots of people to it.
Thank you.
I didn't want to talk about it at first because we're talking about business and business development. But I personally think, and at creditpathway.com, we certainly talk with clients if we can and when we can about this need to develop yourself and personal development as being the key to unlocking everything it obviously touches, because wherever you go, you take yourself with you. So that being said, this idea and concept of embodied cognition and this idea that we're basically taught in school to be these walking, talking heads, and these walking, talking heads are in terms of the portion of the brain that we're told to pay attention to is only a fraction of who and what we are. Can you talk about the Mythos Self, and I'd like to, as we close the interview, go into personal development and how this is so universally, fundamentally influential on someone's life as a whole?
Well, the answer is, of course, I can, and I'm happy to. And I'm going to be cautious because this could easily open the Pandora's box of my rants and rages if I let it go there, because I agree with everything you just said and pointed to. We are, unfortunately, as a culture, as a society, conditioned and allowing our children to a great extent to be conditioned to be, as you put it, walking, talking heads, right? And to abide by the signals and the rules of authority. The vast majority of people I meet, entrepreneurs included, they think that they made the decision to do what they're doing. They think they made the decisions to be entrepreneurs. They think they made the decision to go to work for 20 hours a day because they're going to somehow create a better life for their family when they're not with their family for 7 days a week for 20 hours a day. And the insanity that's been driven into their brain that this is what success looks like is absolutely, at the very, very least, beguiling. It's like witchcraft, but it's absolutely, in my opinion as well, methodical. And it's been done with intention, because the society at large, the bigger picture, if you will, at those higher levels of the people who run things, so to speak, the corporate heads, the governmental heads, the institutional heads, they need people who will follow orders and follow an authoritarian rule set. People who think for themselves are dangerous. And what I want is I want to build a society of dangerous people. I want to surround myself with people who are awesomely, frighteningly dangerous because they think all the time. They're noticing what's happening, and they're aware because they're attending to how does it actually feel to experience what's just going on. How does it feel when my boss tells me, hey, Joe, we need you to hang around for an extra 2 hours tonight. We can't really pay you anymore, but we are all committed. This is a loyal company, and we need you to pitch in and be part of the team. How does that feel? Because if I can acknowledge, again, and pay attention to and notice how lousy it is in my body to hear that and think about what that means, and to be missing my daughter's performance at the recital tonight because my boss thinks I need to be part of the team, I can begin to think for myself. I can begin to, as you put it, authentically and genuinely say, no, I'm not going to do it, and accept the consequences. See, nobody's willing to accept the consequences. We've been taught not to accept the consequences. We still think we're that kindergarten kid at 5 years old, and the teacher called us out for getting the answer wrong to how much is 2 plus 2, or what letter comes after D. And we're still afraid of being ashamed and guilted into doing things that we know we really don't want to do and that don't serve us and the people we love the most. And the Mythos Self process is a process that really says, how do we regain our birthright to be independent, free-thinking individuals who have liberty in terms of the choices for the actions they take and the decisions they make. And the fundamental thing that I've been looking at for 20-plus years of my life is what we can call relationality. So a lot of people know about the idea of relativity, the whole idea of Einstein's, everything's relative. Things are only what they are, relative to something else. Well, in human terms, this is about relationality. part of what goes on is we instantly and automatically begin to build relationships with one another as soon as we come into contact. And we develop meanings about what that other person, who that other person is for us. And if you think about it, there's a very small group of people who probably are actually deeply meaningful to you, who you would let into the inner circle of your life if you really thought about it. And it's not your boss. It's not your creditors. It's not your clients. It's not your advisors. It's your people that you love deeply, who care about you and you want to care about. And how are you organizing your life to really demonstrate that in the actions you take? So if we can start there again, Mark, if we can start at the relational level and really see with clarity and great conviction who are the most important people in our lives, starting with ourselves, and then from there the smallest circles we can build incrementally that contain the most significant people to us in our lives, and then recognize that past maybe the third, possibly the fourth circle, we're probably looking at a group of 20, 25, maybe 30 people. And everybody else beyond that level is really somebody we can say no to at the drop of a hat. We don't owe them anything, and they have no ability to make demands on us other than those we choose to engage in with them. Because then we have the energy, then we have the resources, then we have the time to give to those people we claim to care about and love the most. And at the end of your life, when you're 90 years old, you cannot go back and recover this. You cannot go back and reclaim what you did not do. So, again, I told you we could open Pandora's box here, and I can get off on a rant. But if you want to ask me what I think the most important work I do is, it's really shaking people up that I work with and helping them to understand that why they do what they do is so they can be that person that they always dreamed they would be someday, and to have those people in their lives that they always dreamed that they would have in their lives, and be the person they want to be for those people first and foremost. Not because of what those people can give to them, but because of what they can give to those people that they claim to love.
So in addition to going and buying your Myth of Self program, which I recommend anyone listening to this call go quickly and immediately do, in addition to using that program and what it does, just for the listeners, is it helps your mind program at the subconscious level how to become and how to be at your best. And you know, it's a hypnosis program, but it's a hypnosis program that's not going to bore you to death, and it's not going to make you feel like your life is you know, moving before your eyes at the speed of a turtle. But can you talk about practical steps that people can take to two points, take control of and you talk about the fact that you need to begin living your story versus the story that's been given to you. And then, of course, the subconscious, which is probably the byproduct of, you know, after you become the age of 5. I know that's a wide, rambling, wide question, but can you talk more about steps to take control of your own, as you call it, story?
Well, the program that you're talking about, we call the Complete Package, TCP. And it's
right.
a series of 5 audio sessions, in essence, with some very, very customized, highly designed neurotronic music that's in the background that is designed to literally reshape your mind, to reshape the way you think and how you think. And the reason that it works, Mark, is because a lot of the stuff we're talking about is in that 4th step in the process of getting unstuck. So there's, you know, having an outcome that's worth going for, what do you need to do, how you need to do it, and getting past the unconscious limitations or the hidden limitations. Well, they're hidden, they're unconscious. And this program works at that unconscious hidden level. So when you ask about practical things someone can do to make a difference, if this stuff is hidden and unconscious for you, it's going to be very difficult to access it and to do anything about it. So you have to bring it out into the open. Now, there's a couple of ways to do that, and every one of them requires a level of commitment, right? The first thing that I recommend to everyone is that you should begin to seriously consider keeping a journal. seriously consider, start taking notes about what goes on in your life and what's important to you. Now, I don't mean a diary where you write, at 8:05, I had a bagel with butter and a cup of coffee. That's not the kind of thing I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you at the end of the day to sit down while it's still fresh in your mind and write, today some important things happened for me. I got this thing to occur, or I encountered somebody I hadn't talked to before and this happened, or I saw an old friend and I remembered the feelings. You want to begin to bring out of yourself an awareness, what's called reflection, about the way that you're experiencing your experience. And there's a lot of good material out there, books that you can read that will actually help you go through the process of becoming more reflective. But I strongly recommend the easiest way to do it is buy an inexpensive pad, sit down at the end of the day with a pen or a pencil, and write out your thoughts about what the most important things that happened to you in that day are. Now, do this without intention. In other words, you're not trying to accomplish something. Just write. Keep the journal. At the end of the first month of keeping a journal, the whole month, do nothing but keep the journal. And then, after 4 weeks of doing it, go back and scan what you've written. Take a look. Begin to look for patterns. Is there something that consistently comes up for you which you recognize is really important to you? Are there things that come up which are constantly getting in your way and you recognize are always there when you have a bad day? What are the patterns in your life? So as you begin to make yourself more aware of what the patterns are, you'll begin to catch them as they're happening. You'll begin to, in the moment, be able to do something about it rather than after the fact being in that position where you think, oh shoot, if I had only thought about this then, I could have said that. You'll be able to do it in the moment, right? So the journal becomes really a life-fulfilling way of getting in touch with yourself outside of what you can access consciously. And that's the way you do it. You go back, as I say, after the 4 weeks and begin to look and search for patterns of what's most important, right? And you want to keep a journal for a minimum of 6 months. Now, that's why I say a lot of people are just not going to be willing to make the investment. They're not going to do what it takes. But if you want to shape your own mind, if you want to take back control of your mind, you have to find out what was put in there. Because in 6 months, you're going to start recognizing and realizing you're responding to things and you're doing things that you don't believe in. And you're going to recognize that you heard these things when you were in 3rd grade from Mrs. Jones, or that your next door neighbor used to say this and tell your mother how you should behave, and it went in there somehow when you weren't paying attention. Or well-meaning people around you, your mother, your father, your brothers, your sisters, your aunts, your uncles, whoever it might be, who cared about you, put a lot of ideas in your head that you didn't even recognize were going in at the time because you had that little soft brain and skull and mind and everything seeped in easily when you were 4 years old and 5 years old, but it got in there deeply. But in 6 months, your journal will begin to reveal to you the stuff that comes out of you, the way that you respond, what you respond to, that's out of your control because it got in there when you weren't looking, so to speak. And this, for me, is probably one of the most important things that we can do. Now, the other thing is, again, a very skilled person can help you do this very quickly, very rapidly. But a good friend, a colleague that you spend time with can also do this if you'll begin to work with one another on a level where you can exchange some of these thoughts and create some support for one another. This is the Napoleon Hill thing, right? The mastermind idea, where you share your ideas with a group of peers and colleagues. And in a business environment, I'm not talking for you now to reveal your deepest, darkest secrets. I'm talking about revealing your concerns, revealing your worries, revealing your hopes and your dreams to peers and colleagues in a closed circle of trust where they can reflect to you in a way what theirs are as well. And all of a sudden, a group of 5 or 6 or 10 people begin to recognize, oh, shoot, I'm not alone, right? Many years ago, it feels like 100 years ago, one of the guys I was working with, who today is an extremely successful entrepreneur, I knew him in the very early days of his startup, when there wasn't a business. We had a conversation, and I made a comment to him, and I said something effective. You know that voice in your head that you talk to when you're all alone? And he literally went like, and looked around and went, "How do you know?" And I went, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, how do you know I have a voice in my head?" And I said, "Pretty much everybody on the planet has a voice in their head, Bob." And he went, "Oh my God, I thought I was the only one." And, you know, it's this thing where you think you're the only one, you also think there's nothing you can do about it. As soon as you get that you're completely different and the same as everybody else, life becomes a lot easier, Mark.
I wanted to add something that really helped me with respect to your work, and I'm hoping that it will help someone else, and I know it will. I think it was in your sales program, invariably and interestingly enough, that you were talking about this. You were talking about the insanity of a grown adult blaming their parents, and I think all of us have done this at one point in our life, or how what limiting belief we're carrying with us. And for those that don't know what a limiting belief, it's just a belief that is holding you back, and holding you back to your own, to your own ability to move forward. And really, I think what's interesting about that is you talked about the fact that your parents did the best that they could in raising you based on their own limiting beliefs and based on what they were given and based on a lot of models of the world that might otherwise have not have suited them, and they just never have taken the time to actually address the thoughts that are running around in their head. So I don't know if I did it justice, but in closing, I think this would be a good topic in terms of your Pandora's box to riff on, in terms of the society we're living in, where people tend to put this blame, justification, and shame onto others instead of look internally and where is it that I can take responsibility for my own position in life as to where I am and where I want to be.
Well, I mean, probably my favorite comment in this regard is really very simple, and it's just get over yourself, right? Like, what's happening is happening for you right now, right here. Deal with what's in front of you. Stop trying to figure out how you got to where you are or why you are the way you are so much all the time. There's a time to do that and to be reflective, as we've just talked about. But in the moment where you need to take action, trying to understand why you are limited is not useful. That's not the time to do it. Like an athlete who plays a professional sport, you practice before you get on the court. You don't learn to play on the court when you're facing your toughest opponent, right? You perfect it maybe in that circumstance in the cauldron of competition, but you better come into the cauldron well prepared. So really getting over yourself is important. And what's interesting is I think we see this in bold relief as we're here in the United States at this moment in time in a very contested presidential race, right? The internally within the two major parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, there's all kinds of mudslinging and nasty language going back and forth between the opponents seeking the candidacy of the primary. And then in the general election terminology, the Republicans and the Democrats have nothing good to say about one another. And this is absurd because, in part, they're also looking to this long history of the party and the individual and why in every case the other guy is to blame, and in their case they're not to blame. Somebody else did it. Somebody else made it happen that way. Somebody else pointed to them. And what we're all hoping for, and it's really interesting because I talk to a lot of people about this, and pretty much everyone I talk to is really desiring, they're yearning for somebody to stand up and say, you know what, I'm responsible. There's a great story that was told about this gentleman who started the original Navy SEALs program. Back then, it was called BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition. And he was the first diver who had developed the BUDS training. He was asked to do that by John F. Kennedy. And he was called in front of Kennedy. Now, you have to remember, this is a grizzled old sailor. And this grizzled old sailor is being asked by John Kennedy, this young buck from the Democratic Party, who's not seen as a conservative that would meet the aspirations of this old grizzled sailor. And Kennedy asks him to put this program together. And something happens when he meets Kennedy. And Kennedy basically says, you know, listen, if you do this, regardless of what happens, the buck stops here. I'm responsible for what happens. I will take responsibility for the result of this program. If anything goes wrong, it's not on you, it's on me. And the story goes, apocryphally maybe, that this old sailor, in agreeing to take the position, says, Mr. President, I did not vote for you, but I would die for you. That's the power of owning up to being responsible in your life and really making it clear to others that you're willing to carry that weight on your shoulders and not put it on theirs.
I can't think of a better way to end this call. Everyone here at Credit Pathway really creditpathway.com really enjoyed this call, and I know I learned some new things out of it, which was great, especially after the hours of watching you. You know, you always wonder if I've sucked all the information out, but in any event, where can I know I gave your link out earlier, but where can our subscribers and viewers find you, and definitely again pick up the complete package and your other coaching programs? You have a great sales program that it's been a couple years, but I'm pretty sure it's still on there as well. Can you give the link for our subscribers?
Absolutely. I mean, the website is very, very cleverly named. It's www, as all websites typically are, josephriggio.com. So if you go to josephriggio.com, which is my main website, as soon as you get there, you'll have an opportunity to jump in and sign up for my e-list, really my email list, called Riggio's Rants. We don't do a newsletter. We're not going to inundate anybody with all kinds of mails and offers. I pretty much reach out when I have something of value to say, and I always notify people when I put something new up on my blog, which is not all that frequent, but a couple of times a month. And we're just about to start a new podcast, which we'll also notify everyone of, called Riggio on You, which is me really ranting on the way of the world and how people can begin to build that kind of leadership ideal that I just finished talking about, referring to. And the way to start all that is go to josephriggio.com, JOSEPHRIGGIO, Joseph Riggio, just like my name, .com, and sign up for my Riggio's Rant e-list.
Awesome. Thanks, Joseph. Appreciate the time, and bon, I don't even know how to say it, bon abundanza.
What you're looking to say is
Bona fortuna.
Yes, a lot of abundance. Thanks. Always a pleasure talking to you. Buona fortuna and abbondanza. Arrivederci.
Okay.